Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Well, as part of our special Veterans Day broadcasting, military historian, U.S. Army veteran, and award-winning author Mike Guardia is back on Big Blend Radio today, and he's joining us to talk about his brand new book. It's called Air War on the Eastern Front. And, check it out. It is all about when, way back in June 1941, Hitler decided to launch what's called Operation Barbarossa, a full-scale invasion of the Soviet homeland. And, I don't know, for me, you always think about World War II, and I always get right into Germany and France and Belgium and all those areas. But the Soviet side, or the Russian side, is really pretty interesting because that's almost like spurred it off, I think. I'm saying I think because Mike will clear all of that up. Mike is our military historian that comes on our shows all the time. He's also one of our experts in Big Blend Radio and TV magazine. And as Nancy and I travel the country, we find all this military history, and he comes on and talks about that too, especially in regards to generals. Mike is an author of a gazillion books, a ton of them. And this is his latest one. So check it out, Air War on the Eastern Front. It's out today, November 11th. So go get it on Amazon. Go to his website, MikeGuardia.com. So welcome back, Military Mike. How are you doing?
Hey, ladies. I'm doing great. It's great to be on the show, as always.
Thank you. So am I right? I've got to bring that up about, I forgot this whole Russian side, right, of World War II, which is, nuts. But, that's me. That kind of in reading your book, it was wait a minute, this was something that was brewing for 20 years, and then that kind of went between. That was the whole. I wouldn't say the glue between World War I and II. It'd be the fire between World War I and II that was building.
Right. So here in the West, we typically tend to focus on what happened from the Western Allied side. I think there tends to be more focus and a little bit more publicity given to what the Americans and the British were doing against the Germans. And then, of course, you also have the other side of the coin, which focuses on operations in the Pacific. And I think comparatively speaking, the operations along the Eastern Front, what the Soviets were doing against the Germans, tends to get a little bit less attention than some of the other big-name operations throughout the war.
And this is Operation Barbarossa, and so it was known as the Great Patriotic War, which is an interesting, we think about now. The word patriot is being used in so many ways now, but Operation Barbarossa, so that sounds like a wine label to me. But no, don't do that. But so this was something that Hitler, he was brewing this for a while, right? It was his intention for a while to say, hey, I'm going to go out there and get the Soviets next.
It was. And really, in order to get a good, clear picture as to what was happening, you really have to wind the clocks all the way back to the end of World War I, because that conflict, they called it the war to end all wars.
Yeah.
And up to that point, it was the bloodiest conflict in human history. And it really did not end well either for the Russians or the Germans. For better or for worse, the Germans really got straddled with the burden of guilt for World War I at the Treaty of Versailles. And in many ways, it was almost more of a tragedy for the Russian people, because this was before the Soviet Union actually existed. It was still the Russian Empire at the time, and it was under the leadership of Tsar Nicholas. And Russia entered the war on the side of the Allies, but by 1917, Russia actually had to quit the fight because Tsar Nicholas had his own problems to deal with, not only with the popular uprisings, but also with the rise of the Bolshevik Revolution. So by the time Russia quits the fight, Tsar Nicholas and the Romanov family, they're only about a year and a half from meeting their ultimate demise. And all of a sudden, the Russian Empire goes into the ash bin of history and is replaced by the brand new Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And by the mid-20s, you have Joseph Stalin, who's running the show.
Yeah.
And and he is now preaching, he's now preaching the so-called virtues of all things communism. And if you look on the other side of Europe, in the wake of World War One, the Weimar Republic is trying to make sense out of the chaos and devastation of the post-World War I era, which doesn't last too long before Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist German Workers' Party comes to power. And from the ensuing chaos on both sides of Europe, really becomes a tale of two dictators. You have one maniacal dictator, Adolf Hitler, in Western Europe, and then in Eastern Europe you have Joseph Stalin.
Wow.
Really are two sides of the same coin. The only thing that really separates them is one is a fervent communist, and the other one just sees himself as a messiah of sorts.
Yeah.
To lift Germany out of the post-war chaos and establish a brand new 1,000-year Reich. So you have a story at this point of two toughest kids on the block, and it's really only a matter of time before they start coming to blows. Neither one of them fully trusted each other or really even liked each other, but I think of the two, Stalin had the more Machiavellian attitude towards how he saw the future of the Soviet Union, because he took a very close look at how Hitler came to power and how Hitler consolidated his grip over the German people. And he said, okay, he's a capitalist, he's a fascist, I'm a communist. So knowing what he's capable of, and if his actions in Austria and Czechoslovakia are any indication, he's probably going to want to spread his dominance throughout the European mainland. But if World War I was any type of a predictor, he's probably going to draw France and Great Britain into another European war. Now, the U.S. may or may not get involved, but if Hitler starts another war on mainland Europe, chances are he's going to wear himself out, and he's likely going to be on the losing end of that. And if and when that happens, the ensuing destabilization that he causes in Europe will give me a ripe opportunity to establish Soviet domination on the European mainland. So I'm going to keep my eye on this guy, and I'm going to see what he does. And in the meantime, I'm going to sign this non-aggression pact with him that says essentially he can do whatever he wants to do in Western Europe, and we're going to share Poland as our stomping ground, so to speak. And if ever he draws the rest of Europe, or even if he draws North America into a protracted war, well, I'm just going to play my position. I'm going to bide my time and wait for the moment is right for when I can make all of Western Europe essentially a Soviet client state. Well, Hitler, for his part, while all this is happening, says to himself, my biggest ambition is to, one, make up for the injustice that was done to Germany at the Treaty of Versailles, and to further the cause of the Aryan race. And when he's doing that, he spreads his domination throughout Western Europe, launches World War II by invading Poland. Then he goes into Denmark and Norway and France. Then of course you have the fall of France, and he is almost successful in dominating all of Western Europe, if not for the bravery of the Royal Air Force in Britain and the ensuing Battle of Britain, which keeps him from getting a toehold on the entire continent. Well, even though Hitler loses in the Battle of Britain, he's still undaunted by his designs for domination and establishing more living room for the greater German Empire. He discards his non-aggression pact with Stalin, which he never really had any intention of abiding by anyway, and he decides that he wants to invade the Soviet Union. And in the summer of 1941, he takes a close look at what he thinks is solid gold intelligence, and he tells himself, okay, Stalin cut off his nose to spite his face. He killed a lot of his best officers during the Great Purge, and his Air Force is weak, his Army is weak. Territorial size is really the only advantage that he has going for him. The Soviet people are scared. They're terrified of their own leader. So I'm sure that if I invade, I'm going to make short order of any armed resistance that Stalin mounts against me, and the Soviet people are going to see me as liberators. And I guarantee that I'm going to be in Moscow by the 1st of December. And he's also thinking to himself along the traditional lines of warfare, saying that as long as I capture the capital city, I will have ultimate victory.
Wow,
because warfare back in those days, it was kind of like capture the flag. If you capture the capital city, that's it, game over, you've won. But he doesn't count on a few things. One, he doesn't count on the fact that if you invade the Soviet Union, you better pack some winter clothes, because those winters are the most brutal of anywhere. I mean, we're talking double-digit sub-zero temperatures every day for months at a time. And he also didn't count on the resolve of the Soviet people. They may have said, okay, Joseph Stalin is a brutal dictator, but by God, he's our brutal dictator, and nobody invades our country and gets away with it. And one thing you really have to know about the Russian people, both in the Soviet era and after the Soviet era, is that they are fiercely patriotic, and they feel that they have a great country, not because of any type of government, but in spite of it. And if foreigners start to invade, they will fight to the last standing person, last man, woman, and child to expel the invader. And by the fall of 1941, Hitler's invasion had stalled, and he was very quickly on the losing end of that battle, to where they pushed the German forces back into the heart of the fatherland.
What's interesting about what you talk about the civilians, it was something that I kept, picking up on through the book, and well written. I mean, that was Nancy and I both said, it takes us back to school about how World War II happened.
Well, I think it should be in schools.
Yeah, and you also brought in this whole other side.
I think that people would learn history way easier and remember it better with your writing style, as opposed to, I'm just thinking back to textbooks I was, having to read, and couldn't make my mind go there with how they were written. Sorry, whoever wrote those. I just feel like if it's in a story form, you remember it better than when it's written sort of almost like a recipe book, some of the textbooks on history.
So, Mike, the one thing you talk about throughout the book that Nancy and I were reading, is that you brought in civilians quite a bit, that they were really part of like saying, hey, don't, you're not going to invade our country, like you're just saying now too, but it's throughout the book. And this is a story you don't really see in textbooks. Like I said at the beginning, it's like, you reminded us of World War II history that, go back to school and remember that. But these are those stories you don't always get, those little nuggets, as well as women being part of the Air Force, the Red Air Force, and then going into the regiment too, the 586 Fighter Aviation Regiment. I thought that was really fascinating to see women in here, because we think about in America we have Rosie the Riveter, right? And but it was like, I wonder if that also helped spur on Rosie the Riveter, was what was going on with the Russian women being part of this. So it's interesting, just those stories in there. I think it brings it on home to people that, we always think about boom, boom, this is what happened. But no, there's all these people and women and civilians saying no. It's interesting because of Hitler too, thinking that, he could just come in and do that. And especially with the Red Air Force, because the Red Air Force weren't they kind of at their last legs at that point? And then, but they weren't really. That's what Hitler thought. But they were actually kind of reforming kind of thing, like they were getting stronger at that point.
Pretty much. Yeah, the Red Air Force had really suffered under the purges from Stalin, and he really did himself a disservice by killing off a lot of his best officers and his best pilots.
So weird.
And to make matters worse for the Red Air Force, a lot of the equipment that they had was technologically inferior to some of the great planes that the Luftwaffe was fielding. Yeah, there was little question that the Luftwaffe really had the technological edge over the Red Air Force. But where the Red Air Force really established parity was how quickly they were able to adapt to the situation, and how quickly they were able to mobilize massive numbers of airplanes and really learn on the fly and learn under fire. And where you really see them start to shine, where you really see them start to turn the tables qualitatively, is right around 1943, because at around this time they realized that the current stable of aircraft that they have, technologically it's behind what the Luftwaffe is putting out, but they say, okay, if we make an adjustment here and an adjustment there to the existing airplanes that we have, and if we can reverse engineer some of the captured airframes that we have from the Luftwaffe, we can make our own planes that much better. And they also found out very quickly that the aerial engagements happening over the Eastern Front were happening at elevations below 20,000 feet. So they said to themselves, okay, well, we can have high altitude interceptors, which will be good to interdict bomber formations. But if we really want to establish air superiority, what we have to do is make nimble fighters that can be high-turning, low-altitude planes. And that's what eventually gave birth to the crates like the Yak-7 and the LA-5 and LA-7, the big stablemates that really became the centerpieces of Soviet fighter aviation.
So using aircraft like this, was that cheaper, more effective than people on the ground? I mean,
well, no, it wasn't necessarily cheaper, but what the Soviets understood was that if they were going up against a multidimensional enemy like the German army, or really the German armed forces in total, both the army and the Luftwaffe, they said, okay, well, we have to defeat the Germans on the ground and in the air.
Yeah.
They said air power alone isn't really going to win the war, and we can do it with just ground troops. But given the three-dimensional beatings that will be taken from the Luftwaffe, we really need to have an air force of our own that will keep the skies clear and will keep our troops on the ground as unmolested as possible. And that's when they really said, okay, well, the first thing we need to do is we need to mobilize as many ground formations as we can and make sure that they have top cover. And while we're doing that, we need to send our ground formations into combat with a good layer of close air support that will disrupt the enemy ground formations. And we need to have fighters that will, if not outright defeat the Luftwaffe, then at least disrupt their operations enough to where they can't impede the access of our troops who are on the ground.
Wow, I find it fascinating with the, how they go and get everything together like this, and they're formulating everything. But we have to remember, like as you make a big point in the book, is that this was the largest continuous military operation in history. How long did this last? This whole war on the Eastern Front?
It was brutal. It went on from June of 1941 all the way up until May of 1945 when the Germans surrendered.
Wow. This is huge. So can we please talk about the women?
Absolutely.
Listen, the White Rose, because Nancy and I just stayed at a White Rose cabin on a farm. It's a farm stay in Spring Creek in East Tennessee, and we had your book, and we're staying in her cabin. It's a White Rose of Stalingrad. So this is amazing to me about these women firefighters. It's not firefighters, pilots. These fighters, they're fighters. It's kind of like America also still learning about the Tuskegee Airmen. It's like we didn't know. So Lydia, is it Lydia Litviak? I don't want to say I can pronounce anything in Russian, but she was pretty amazing. Can you tell everybody about her?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the Soviet Union was unique in the sense that among the Allies, they did not have any formal restrictions against women serving in combat. And a lot of women flocked to the Soviet recruiting stations, wanting to serve the war effort in some form or fashion. Now, unofficially, the Soviet government tried to discourage women from fighting, but if any woman wanted to fight, they did not try to stop them at all. They pretty much saw it as an opportunity, like, hey, if you can stand on your own 2 feet and you're healthy enough to be in combat, sure, we want you. So the proviso to that was that many women served in gender-segregated units, and one of the most prominent segregated units was the 586 Fighter Aviation Regiment, which was an all-female fighter pilot unit for a long time.
Wow!
And the most decorated member of that aviation regiment was a young 21-year-old lady whose name was Lydia Litviak, and she had a very short but a very daring life. Her father was actually a victim of one of Stalin's purges. For one reason or another, and nobody really knows why, he was deemed to be an enemy of the people, and suddenly in the late 30s, her father disappeared, and probably ended up in Siberia at one of the death camps out there. But she never lost her fervent Soviet patriotism, and by the time she was 14, she had actually enrolled in a flying club. And she had quite a few flight hours under her belt by the time World War II started. So she decided to put her flying skills to good use and become a fighter pilot in the Red Air Force. And she took to it pretty much like a duck takes to water, and was incredibly talented in the plane. Just could perform incredible maneuvers and outfly many of her peers, both male and female. And by the time she was 21, she had already had about 12 or 13 confirmed air-to-air kills. She was completely vicious in the air. Downed several enemy planes, to include many examples of of what would be the pride of the Luftwaffe. Downing BF-109s or Ju-88s. She was definitely a force to be reckoned with, and because she was so good, she got away with a lot of the antics that would typically get other pilots in trouble. As a nod of sorts to Maverick that we saw in Top Gun, she would take her plane and she would frequently buzz the air control tower. Which of course is not only unsafe, but it's also against the aviation regulations. She thumbed her nose at a lot of other regulations, to include bleaching her hair blonde, which female pilots were not allowed to do. And
there's nothing
she
wrong
also
with that.
wore well, right. But the Soviet military, they got their hang-ups.
Well,
and she also wore a.
Could a guy bleach his hair blonde?
I don't know.
Huh.
I don't know. I don't think anybody could, but
okay.
It was definitely frowned upon for women. And she also wore a white and blue polka dotted scarf, which of course was not a uniform item. And even though she was told not to wear it, she wore it anyway. In fact, there's a famous picture of her where she is sporting her white and blue scarf as part of an official portrait. But
she Amelia Earhart did that too, by the way. Amelia Earhart
Yeah.
had her scarf. Amelia Earhart was, you think about the same time frame, a little later. Amelia Earhart did the same thing. I'm just saying, but sorry, Mike, I just had to put in a fashion statement for Amelia.
Oh, of course. Yeah, and she ultimately met her demise at the age of 21. This was 1943. She was shot down over the Battle of Kursk, and it's unclear to this day who it was that actually shot her down. But most records seem to agree that she was shot down by an FW-190, and they didn't find her remains again for a very long time because. Just because of all the battlefield clutter that was happening down below at the Battle of Kursk. I forget how many years it was later, but it was quite a while before they actually found the remains and confirmed that these were the remains of Lydia Litviak.
Wow.
So, Mike, we've talked about the women aviators and fighters, and hey, they do dogfights because you did talk about that at one point. Did the women do it? Because I know way back when the Red Air Force weren't doing as many dogfights you were talking about in your book. Did the women do dogfights? Did that happen?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. As a matter of fact, every one of Lydia Litviak's air-to-air kills occurred while she was in a dogfight with a German fighter.
Oh, wow. So on the Luftwaffe side, did I pronounce that correct? Luftwaffe, I want to say, because like a different accent here. But one of the beginning part of the book, you did a spotlight on Herman Goring, and this guy, he was like rising up through Hitler's ranks, and then that went sour. Like, that's a crazy story.
Yeah, so Herman Goring, brilliant fighter pilot, brilliant aviator. Yeah, he probably knew more about military aviation than any one of his contemporaries, probably before or since. And the tragedy is that for as smart as he was and for as much of an aviation genius as he was, for lack of a better term, the man was just not a good person. Aligned himself with the Nazi ideology. He stood to be counted with all of the evil that stood for. And for the longest time, he really was seen as Hitler's handpicked successor. He was the man who made the Luftwaffe into the incredible air force that it was, and he was in many ways Hitler's right-hand man. But the relationship between him and Hitler soured very quickly towards the end of the war, not only as a function of Germany very clearly being on the losing end, but as the Allies were closing in on the fatherland, Goring came to Hitler and said, okay, well, things are falling apart. What say you give me control of the Reich and I try to stem the tide of this disaster that is happening all around us. And Hitler, egomaniac that he was, did not take kindly to that, and essentially stripped Goring of all of his responsibilities within the Reich. And not that saved Goring in the long run, because after Nazi Germany surrendered, Goring was among many of the Nazi officials who were rounded up by the Allied Commission and stood trial at Nuremberg, and was one of among the many Nazi leaders who were found guilty of war crimes. But Goring took the easy way out, got his hands on a cyanide capsule, and committed suicide before he was ultimately sent to the gallows. And the interesting footnote about Goring, and what I don't think a lot of people know, is that Goring had a daughter. His daughter was actually born during the peak of the Nazi regime, and given the age of Herman Goring and his wife, the birth and the conception really was considered a miracle, and it was headline news throughout Nazi Germany that the chief of the Luftwaffe had a baby daughter. So the daughter herself
Wow.
was really just a child when her father was when her father was captured and father committed suicide, and she kept a low profile for several years until the 1980s, right around the time when the Berlin Wall fell, when she did a documentary interview with a German production company, essentially just telling her life story, what it was like. Wow. Knowing that she had grown up as the child of a high-ranking Nazi official, and trying to reconcile the Herman Goring that she knew as her daddy versus the Herman Goring that demonstrably did all of these not so nice things while in a position of leadership within the Nazi Party.
Wow,
that's insane.
That had to be tough. Wow.
I mean, where did you get these stories, and what led you to write this book? I mean, this is amazing. I mean, like I was saying, this is not your textbook, but it should be.
Right. Well, I really get these stories from all over. I'm always on the lookout to read anything I can get my hands on. A very big collection of books and documentaries that I have. And, one story will lead to another, and then I'll catch a footnote that'll take me to another book. And then I'll be interviewing somebody for a project, and they say, well, hey, I have this information here, and you can talk to this person. And it's just this ever-growing network of historical anecdotes that, I've acquired throughout the years.
Wow. That's amazing.
It's pretty interesting. I mean, it's really a study of people and what they do and why they do it. And no matter what pressures are put on people, they react in different ways. And, I mean, you can even see that today. So, when you look back, it's easier to look back than to look at the present.
Right.
Because then you're part of it, and then you have to look at yourself. And nobody really wants to do that. So you look at the past, and say, oh, you did this right, you did that wrong. It seems easier. And I always say you're supposed to learn from mistakes of the past, and I'm always wondering if we have,
Yeah.
But then we're still people doing human things and what people do for various reasons, and we're not always on the same page. I think when you go into a thing like the military and you go to combat, then you're on the same page. Well, you better be. But most of the time, people are not always on the same page. So you have all these mixed things going on, and then suddenly there's a war, and you better get your act together and be on the same page. It's very interesting, because I always study the animal world and what they do, and then you look at the human world and what we do, and sometimes I just have to say the animals got it down.
Yeah, I one of the downsides of human consciousness is that is that I think we collectively as people we tend to think that we're smarter than biology, and we rationalize things that we really shouldn't. And of course, human consciousness is a great thing. It's helped us to evolve as a society and accomplish all these great things that animals couldn't. But at the same time, we tend to, I think we tend to go wrong when we think that we can outsmart biology, and we really can't.
I absolutely agree. I mean, animals, people are all kind of connected in some way, but there is this. I don't know. It's about being, I think, attention to detail, and attention to detail means also individual emotions and emotions of other people, and that's the thing. I think we also need to look at with in regards to emotion. Doesn't that play a part in what you're doing? In when you're in combat, you have to you have to balance the emotions. You know what I mean? That's got to be the hardest thing in combat is emotions and quelling that and having to be totally on it. You know what I mean? And being able to, okay, I'm going to hit this target, but not be emotional about it, sad or angry, right? Because it's sad. There's sad. There's fear. All of that. That's what I think has got to be the hardest part. Just me on the side, not have ever being in military combat. Yeah, there's a lot of balances that go in there, and I think about when you look at this war that we're talking about, we've got women in fighter jets and fighting and dog fighting and doing all these things, and then you've also got this whole thing, the citizens rising up in the Soviet. You've got citizens standing up, and I think that's the story that people, the military are trained, but it still have all those emotions that you still go through. So I think that's an interesting part that you brought in on this, is to understand that with the civilians getting in there.
Right.
And
it really was a total war.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Huge war.
It was. I was just going to say, when you look at it just from a number standpoint, really the Soviet Union, they suffered worse than any of the other allies, and they literally lost tens of millions of people. Most of the combat casualties that were suffered in the Soviet Union were actually from non-combatants. They lost more men, women, and children, non-combatants, than any other member of the Allied powers. And if they weren't civilians who were just caught up in the crossfire, then they were civilians who actively took up arms, and they fought alongside the regular army. The stuff that the Soviet partisans were doing, particularly if you look in places like the Ukraine, really it's become the stuff of legend. They were the ones who set the bar higher for guerrilla warfare, in my opinion.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, but how do you exist when you look at somebody like Stalin, who's killing the people he actually really needs to defend his country? And where does that come from? Talk about totally insecure and guilty of something somewhere, in order to even make those moves to start executing people for I don't even know what the reason would be. Other than you're afraid they might take you out because you already know you're doing the wrong thing. Yeah. So you can always tell, when you look at history, you can always tell when a dictator starts making really weird moves and acting erratic, and the guilt complex, which leads to the fear complex, which makes so-called leaders do the wrong thing at the wrong time, and then they get really loud and boisterous, and people start looking at them, and they're almost their own worst enemy.
Yeah. Well, Stalin, he really was your garden variety maniac. There are examples of of dictators like him all throughout history. Hitler, Stalin, Saddam Hussein, all pretty much cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, and it's so weird how they get into power.
Well, how did America end up helping Stalin? That was an interesting thing too.
Yeah, so it really was a case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We had stable relations with the Russian Empire going back several decades before the Soviet Union was around. And after the Soviets came to power, and after communism became the rule of the day, they were technically our ally, but we never trusted their political ideology, and we certainly never trusted Stalin. And you had the first Great Red Scare that happened here in the U.S. during the 1920s, when we thought that communism was going to run roughshod throughout North America. And even during the 1930s, during the darkest days of the Great Depression, there was always that lingering fear that communism was going to take hold.
Yep.
So we regarded them as an ally in the strictest sense, but they were never a group of people, and it was never a political ideology that the U.S. fully trusted. But now that we had a common enemy in Hitler, we told ourselves, okay, well, let's put aside our political differences and defeat this maniac Hitler who was qualitatively evil. And it seemed for a while that even though our political differences were very great, that we would be able to live and let live now that we had come together and we had defeated the qualitative evil of Nazism. But it wasn't long before it was back to business as usual. And, just given the dynamics of World War II, both the free world and the communist world where it ends, and they both had different ideas of how the post-war world should look. And that's really what laid the foundations for the Cold War. But we knew what Stalin was doing. We knew what he was capable of. But it was really a case of, hey, we have a common enemy, so let's work together to try to take this bad boy down.
Wow, that's amazing.
I just remember my grandmother who talked about the war a lot, and I used to question her because I really wanted to know what the heck. I was questioning her when the Vietnam War was going on. I was questioning her about World War II, and she said that if you said Stalin, she's like, oh, I kind of remember that. The only name that really stuck in her mind was Hitler, and everything evil was always him. Nobody else ever did anything wrong. It was always Hitler, and it was an interesting thing. She barely knew who Stalin was. And I was like looking at her like, well, that's this country that was, sort of an ally or going to be an ally, and then it was over here, and then it was over there, and I don't know why we trusted them at that particular time, but she really didn't seem to even know who Stalin was. She only knew who Hitler was, and so I'm wondering if the press maybe had something to do with that. That was the dude. I don't know.
Yeah,
or just her.
Really, it really was a function of publicity. Now, Stalin, of course, he was in the headlines, and the press corps and the media, as it was back then, certainly reported him as being one of the talking heads at the Yalta Conference, and a power player of sorts in the new United Nations. But most of the attention from the Western side, and especially from the North American side, most of the attention was given to what the Western allies were doing. It was very centric on what the American military was doing, what the British military was doing. Like here's what was happening with the Free French forces, and here's what the French Foreign Legion was doing. And if it wasn't those bits and pieces that were coming into the headlines, it was, hey, look over here in the Pacific to what our consolidated forces are doing against the Japanese. So just given that was the main thrust of what was being reported, what was happening on the Eastern Front tended to take a back seat. And I think that's why for at least the first 10 to 15 years after the war, it wasn't as widely known what exactly the Soviets were accomplishing on the Eastern Front. Not that the Soviet Union was a force for good, because they were not. But they were a power player and a key contributor to how we ultimately defeated the Nazis.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so Mike, I was saying earlier that you've written numerous books, like a gazillion of them. So what I wanted to ask you is, what is next, and what number are you at now with this book being out now, Air War in the Eastern Front? Like what number is that for you?
So this is number 18 for me.
Wow. That's a lot. That's a lot. Do you like put a number up on your wall with all the books that you're doing?
No. I actually lost count for a while, and I had to go through my Amazon bibliography just to remind myself how many titles there were. But yeah, this is number 18 for me, and then book 19 and 20 are on the horizon. 19 and 20.
So give everybody a little. Right now, everybody, again, Air War on the Eastern Front out now today. You can get it. Go to Amazon or go to MikeGuardia.com. But what's coming up next for you?
All righty. So the next one in the hopper is a book called Days of Fury, and that is a companion piece to The Fires of Babylon.
Oh.
Is it from the perspective of a unit called Ghost Troop, which fought alongside Eagle Troop from The Fires of Babylon, and it tells the battle from their perspective, all of the enemy units that they encountered, and really great story in the sense that it really adds a richer dimension to a battle that I don't think has gotten a lot of attention in historiography. And then after Days of Fury, the next book that I have coming out is a book called Danger Forward, which is the biography on Paul Gorman, the hero of Pork Chop Hill and the principal architect of what we now know as the Pentagon Papers.
Wow, yeah, that connects back to some of the other writings too. This is interesting how you focus on specific eras, specific battles, and then specific people. And you were talking about how everything's connected for you. But it's interesting how this is just like one story after the other. Are you always writing on all like 3 books at a time or something? Or do you work on one at a specific time?
Well, at any given time, I'm probably juggling 2 or 3 projects. It'll get to a point where I'll take maybe a stretch of about 4 to 6 weeks to focus on tightening up a particular aspect of one project before I shift my focus to completing interviews for another one. And I try to circulate and rotate my time between each of the 2 or 3 projects that I have on the burner at any one point.
Mm. Is it, when you're looking at it, even picking this one on, this whole Air War on the Eastern Front and looking at the people, are there specific things that just attract you? Specific wars? Is it that it hasn't been told yet, or hasn't had enough, stories told about either the person or the specific battle? Or the aircraft.
Well,
look at them. Look at all the F-14s, the F-15s, that you've covered too.
Yeah. Well, I really think that there are a number of things. One of the first things that I think will draw me in is if it's something that hasn't typically gotten a lot of attention previously, and if there's an intense human element that I think readers would enjoy and that I think they would benefit from. And if I could tie it together with a conflict that was really a watershed event in history, either like Vietnam or World War II or even Desert Storm, if I can take an intense human-driven story that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, or if it has gotten attention, maybe put a different angle on it, and just format it within a tightly written story format that will be an easy read for anyone who reads it, then that's what prompts me to throw myself into these projects.
I love it. And I think you also, tell the personal stories, which I think makes a big difference, because you so it's an immediate connection for all of us, I know that you have a huge following of military guys and gals who know all these, all the terminology and everything more than what Nancy and I can say. But it's really fascinating because I think, at the end of the day, history is about people like what Nancy was saying. It gets down to that. It's about us as people, what we've done and what we've created and how we think things through, strategize and make decisions. It's interesting. It's really interesting. We always thank you for joining us on our shows, and we can't wait to get back into some of the stories also from our tour, some of the military history that we've been, experiencing and exploring. So we look forward to that. But everyone, MikeGuardia.com, and before you go, give a shout because you do have a Christmas book coming up, and Christmas is coming, man. It's happening, and I don't care. I know 2020 has been a really cruddy year for a lot of us, but we can still have Christmas, and you can still read Christmas books and have cocoa on the fire.
You sure can.
Yeah.
You sure
Tell
can.
everyone about
and
your
it is
book.
always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you so much for joining us. Again, everyone, MikeGuardia.com. We always love to play music for our guests, and today's song is, it's a beautiful song. This is called A Song for My Father, and this is written by our friend Jimmy Yessian. We call him the Muffin Man, and you can catch him at jimmyyessian.com, and it's off of his latest album as well, so take a listen to A Song for My Father, and it really does touch on World War II and just that connection, that human connection we've been talking about. So take a listen and enjoy.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. God bless.
Me too.
I stumbled in one late night. He was waiting up and sat me down. Said, I think it's time you move on, son. I pray you turn your life around. For years he tried to paint me a picture. Every day you waste, you won't get back. He said life is not a dress rehearsal for another, and the train you're on is running out of track. Now I survived some hard times, and I am finally finding my way. We don't get to talk much, Pop, I hear you every day. And when life hangs a cloud, I think about you. 2 years in prison camp, World War II. Sleeping on a flatwood bed, your helmet was your pillow, and still you shared the last piece of bread. Today is not the first time I have tried to sit you down, but it might be my last chance. They tell me you're not turning round, and I have tried to tell you forever how much it's meant to be your son. But I was trying to be so damn clever, so you never heard. But tonight I swear I'm gonna get it done. life hangs a cloud, I think about you. 2 years in prison camp, World War II. Sleeping on a slatwood bed, your helmet was your pillow, and still you'd share your last piece of bread. Today is the first time I've laid flowers on your grave. Papa, rest in peace now. I'll treasure always our last